10. Imagine being minutes away from takeoff, the engines humming, passengers settled in. When a single accident turns the entire flight upside down, that's exactly what happened on a seemingly routine day when a flight attendant accidentally spilled a drink on the wrong person. This wasn't just any passenger. It was a high-ranking FAA inspector, someone with the power to ground the plane instantly. Tension crackled in the cabin as whispers started spreading among nervous travelers, and the flight crew scrambled to manage the situation. Our story dives into the intense moments that followed, the clash of authority, the pressure of keeping a plane on schedule, and the human emotions that surface when mistakes happen at 30,000 feet. The flight attendant, usually calm under pressure, suddenly faced a nightmare scenario that could affect her career and the passenger's journey. Meanwhile, the FAA inspector, known for being strict and biased, made a decision that shocked everyone on board. As the cabin grew tense and the clock ticked toward departure, every eye watched to see what would happen next. Will the plane take off on time, or will this small accident create a major delay? Stay tuned, because the story is about to take an unexpected turn. The flight attendant, Sarah, had been working in the airline industry for nearly a decade. She knew how to handle emergencies, from medical situations to irate passengers. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. A spilled drink might seem minor to most people, but in the world of aviation, where rules and safety protocols are everything, it could become a serious problem in seconds. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she apologized, grabbing napkins and trying to clean the mess, all while the FAA inspector's sharp gaze seemed to pierce through her. The inspector, Mr. Collins, had a reputation that preceded him, known for being meticulous, strict, and unflinchingly by the book. He didn't tolerate mistakes easily. Pilots and crew often whispered stories of flights delayed because of his inspections, and today, it seemed like Sarah was about to become the latest chapter in that legacy. Passengers sensed the tension immediately. Some exchanged worried glances, wondering if the plane would take off on time. Others pulled out their phones, anticipating news of an unusual delay. Meanwhile, Sarah could feel the weight of every decision, how she spoke, how she moved, every small action scrutinized. The cabin felt smaller, charged with unease, and the clock ticked louder than ever, leaving everyone on edge, waiting for Mr. Collins to make his move. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself as the passengers murmured and shifted in their seats. She could feel the eyes of the cabin crew on her, some sympathetic, others silently wondering how this would end. The spilled drink had landed squarely on Mr. Collins' uniform, and though he didn't raise his voice, the tension in his posture was unmistakable. Every small movement from grabbing his briefcase to adjusting his jacket felt like a judgment on her competence. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the pilots exchanged worried glances. They knew the FAA inspector had the authority to delay the flight indefinitely. Captain Reynolds tapped the controls nervously, calculating fuel, schedules, and the potential fallout from a grounded plane. The weight of responsibility pressed on him. He understood that one decision here could ripple into hours of delay. Frustrated passengers and media attention, passengers began noticing subtle shifts in the cabin's energy. Some tried to remain calm, reading or scrolling on their phones, while others whispered theories about what could happen next. Among them was a young woman traveling to a critical job interview and a father with a toddler, both unaware of how this small incident might drastically affect their day. Back near the galley, Sarah attempted to explain herself, but her words felt insufficient. Mr. Collins remained silent, his expression unreadable. The conflict wasn't just a spilled drink, it was a clash of authority, responsibility, and human error, unfolding in a confined space where every second mattered. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move, knowing that once Mr. Collins spoke, nothing would feel the same. The cabin grew heavier with each passing second, every passenger sensing that something was about to happen. Sarah's hands were clammy as she wiped the last remnants of the spilled drink from Mr. Collins' jacket, but the tension didn't ease. The inspector's eyes scanned the galley, then the aisle, and finally rested on her. His silence was more powerful than any words could have been, a quiet storm that left everyone guessing. Captain Reynolds cleared his throat over the intercom, attempting to calm the growing anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor delay," he said, carefully avoiding any direct mention of the incident. But even his calm voice couldn't mask the urgency that radiated through the cockpit. The pressure mounted, not just from the passengers, but from airline protocols, schedules, and the looming presence of federal authority. In the cabin, murmurs grew louder. Some passengers shot nervous glances at Sarah, while others whispered speculations about what might happen if the flight were grounded. The young woman holding her laptop tightened her grip, worried about missing her interview. The father of the toddler looked helplessly at the ceiling, silently praying that the plane would take off soon. Sarah's mind raced. One wrong word, one hesitant move, and the situation could spiral beyond control. Mr. Collins finally shifted in his seat, the slow movement making every eye follow him. The plane felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were pressing down. And then, just as the engines began to hum louder, he stood up, a simple gesture, but one loaded with authority. The cabin fell completely silent, every heartbeat synchronized with the suspense. waiting to see whether the plane would remain grounded, or if chaos was about to erupt. Just as the cabin held its collective breath, Mr. Collins' phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. His eyes flicked to the screen, and a shadow passed over his usually composed expression. He muttered something under his breath, barely audible, and for a moment, the tension in the cabin shifted. An invisible weight pressed harder against Sarah and the crew. The spilled drink was no longer the only problem. Captain Reynolds noticed the change immediately. He leaned closer to his co-pilot, whispering about the unexpected call from the FAA headquarters. Something urgent, something that could escalate the situation beyond a routine inspection. The flight that had already been teetering on delay suddenly had stakes that no one on board fully understood. Every second now mattered more than ever. Passengers began exchanging uneasy glances, feeling the shift in energy without knowing why. Phones discreetly captured the tension, and social media notifications started buzzing as passengers shared cryptic updates about the unusual hold on the flight. Sarah's heart pounded. This was no longer about a simple mistake. The FAA inspector's authority was compounded by something urgent, a complication that could potentially ground the plane for hours, or worse. Mr. Collins looked directly at Sarah again, but this time his stare carried something heavier, an unspoken warning, and perhaps a hint that the spilled drink was just the beginning. The engines idled, passengers whispered, and the crew braced for a storm that none of them had anticipated. Knowing that whatever happened next could change everything, the tension snapped like a wire when Mr. Collins finally spoke, his voice calm but sharp, carrying the weight of authority that no one dared challenge. "This flight cannot take off until we resolve a safety concern," he announced, his eyes scanning the cabin. Gasps rippled through the passengers, but Sarah felt a strange mix of dread and relief. She realized that her spilled drink had triggered more than just a minor confrontation. It had exposed a small mechanical issue the inspector had noticed during his pre-flight walkthrough. Captain Reynolds immediately responded, coordinating with ground control and mechanics, his experience keeping the chaos from spiraling completely out of control. Sarah assisted where she could, her professionalism shining through despite the earlier panic. Passengers, initially anxious, began to understand that the delay was for their safety. Some even offered words of encouragement to the crew, their frustration turning into admiration for how the situation was handled. Then, just when it seemed the plane would finally be cleared for takeoff, Mr. Collins held up his hand. "One more thing," he said, reaching into his briefcase and producing a small envelope. He handed it to Sarah, who hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mistakes happen. How you handle them defines you." The cabin collectively exhaled as the engines roared to life, the flight finally moving toward departure. But the final twist lingered. Sarah realized that the spilled drink, a moment she had feared would ruin her career, had inadvertently earned her respect from the strictest FAA inspector she had ever faced. And as the plane lifted off, she couldn't help but wonder what unexpected challenges the skies might throw at her next. As the plane finally soared into the sky, the tension that had gripped the cabin began to ease. Sarah moved down the aisle, offering smiles and brief reassurances to passengers, many of whom thanked her for handling the situation with such poise. The young woman with the laptop let out a relieved sigh, realizing she might still make her important interview, while the father gently soothed his toddler, grateful that the flight was back on track. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds exchanged